Hi there. In the next 20 minutes, I'll teach you the basics of programming. We're going to learn by doing, but don't worry, we'll go slowly and explain every step. Today's project is to create a Python script that will ask us for two numbers and give us the result of a few calculations. Along the way, we will learn about inputs, outputs, variables, branching logic, and loops. You may not know those terms yet, and that's okay. Let's get started. First, we pull up Notepad++. Notepad++ is actually the program I first learned to code in, so it's effectively Notepad. I think we're all familiar with Notepad, but it has a few extra features that make it better. And then the first point that I want to make here is that every program is a collection of algorithms. So it is helpful to start in Notepad and kind of think through what algorithms do I need to use. If you don't know what an algorithm is, it's basically just a set of instructions. So it's a pretty loose term. It could mean just a couple of steps. It could mean your entire program. But generally we use it to mean smaller chunks of processes. Okay, so let's start with addition. So what it would be our algorithm for addition. And we've all been through math classes. We know that, for instance, in math, we would write it like this. Obviously, in a program, it's a little bit more complicated, but just looking at that line, we can say, okay, so we need a first number and a second number. And then we perform addition. And actually, in this, instead of a need, I'm going to call this an input. And then an output. So, everything in computing is inputs, processing, and outputs. So in this case, an input is simply anything that you put into a program or a piece of code to make it run, and an output is anything that piece of code returns to whatever other piece of code used it or shows to the user. So in this case, let's go ahead and it's a very simple algorithm for us this time. We're going to use Visual Studio Code for our actual programming. Go ahead and start with a basics.py here. And paste in this algorithm. This little symbol here means that it is a comment, which is just information there for the human that the computer does not read. So, since this is Python, things are as easy as possible, so we need to pull in x, and you can do that by simply saying, whoops, please let's just say, please type first number. And what you see here, this x equals, this is our first variable. And all a variable is a way to hold a chunk of information. So in this case, we have a variable x to hold our first number, a variable y to hold our second number, And then we can say sum equals x plus y. This plus is something that is given to us in almost every programming language. So, very, very easy. And then we can just print, and this little f means format, so I can print out the variable with some words very easily. So I'm just going to say sum is sum. Okay, so we come down to our terminal, where we can just type python basics.py. I used tab to complete the file name there. And then, let's say for our first number, let's do 3, and our second number is 5. So, before I hit enter here, just want to point out, we expect it to say 8, right? But instead it says 35. So, clearly, something is missing from our algorithm. And, of course, I personally did know that that was going to happen. But what's going on here is that this x and y are not coming in as numbers. They're coming in as what we call strings, which is a representation of text. And when you add two strings together, it does what's called concatenation. So instead of trying to do a mathematical addition, it just says, oh, you want this string? This string. So if I ran that program again, and instead of typing a number, I typed TO and then that, then it prints out like that. So let's go ahead and consider... Actually, before we do that, let's make this point. Mistakes like this are very, very common. They're very human. Feel free to comment down below with the favorite coding error that you have ever made. But in this case, we need to add an algorithm to convert to an integer or a number. And in Python, again, this is very, very easy because we can just use the word int here and wrap our input like that. And this is something that if you have not seen it before, it might be a little bit confusing. But all we're doing is we're what's called casting to an integer. So now if I try again and I put some words in here, or some letters in here, it does not... Right, I have to save the file. Again, mistakes are common and human. So now if I put some letters, then it says invalid for int, because that's letters, that's not numbers. So we can run that again with our 3 and 5, and now we should actually get 8. There we go. So now, let's add a secondary thing here. We have our addition right there. Let's subtract smaller number from larger number. And how we're going to do this is we are going to use what is called branching logic. So, very simple. We just say if x is greater than y, then we find the difference as x minus y. Again, this symbol and this symbol are basically in every programming language. And then if x is not greater than y, we want our difference to be y minus x. So in this case, since the idea is to subtract the smaller number from the larger number, what we're doing basically is avoiding ever having a negative number. So now if we do our little print statement to give our output to the user, we can just say difference, and let's make sure that works because I declared this variable inside an if-else, but I think it will be fine, and I am just going to keep using 3 and 5. Again, I did not save the program. There we go. So it did 5 minus 3, which is 2. Okay. And then this is probably not how you'd want to do this because there is a multiplication symbol. But let's go ahead and do a multiplication algorithm. So a way to do this in programming is to use what is called a loop. So in this case, we're going to use a for loop. So we can say for, let's say for I in range x. And we are going to have a product equal to 1. Or actually a product equal to 0. So this variable will hold the result of our multiplication. And this for I in range, all this does is it controls that the loop will run exactly x times. So it can be used a little more complexly than that, but that is all we want to do. And we are going to set the product equal to the product plus y. So if we add y to itself x times, that is the same as multiplying it. So for our 3, 5 example that we keep using, it will run through the for loop 3 times, which means it will do this 3 times. On the first time, it will do 0 plus 5. On the second time, it will do 5 plus 5. And on the third time, it will do 10 plus 5, leaving us with 15. So adding in our print statement again. With product, run that. 3 and 5, so we should get 8, 2, and 15. There we go. All right, so another way that we could do this is we could say, we could use a while loop, and that's just something like while, let's see, let's do I equals 0, and then say while I is less than x. Do that. And then we have to add 1 to I. So this is going to result in the same thing. This loop will still run exactly 3 times and give us the same answer. So just to demonstrate that it gives the same answer, there we go. And then let's run it through one more time with some other numbers, such as, let's say, 13 and 27. So it gives us 40, 14, and 351. There is one branch that we haven't done. I haven't done a larger number first, so let's do 13 and 9. So sum of 22, product of 117. Obviously, I'm not double checking the product. Difference of 4. Okay, so that's it. That is just a very simple collection of small algorithms to give us the sum, difference, and product of two numbers. And what we have learned today is that programming is algorithms all the way down. We have learned how to do an input in Python, which is just using the word input. And we don't actually have to have words here, but it is helpful to the user to be able to know, oh, this is what I am supposed to do here. And we have also learned outputs, which is all of this printing to the screen that we see here and here. We have learned variables, which are simply ways to hold values so that we don't have to know what they are the entire time that we are writing the program. We have learned branching logic with our if-else here, where under the condition that x is a larger number than y, it will subtract y from x. Otherwise, it will subtract x from y. So it will either do this branch or this branch. And we have also used a for loop and a while loop. And actually, just a real quick aside here, it is... You may have noticed that in order to do a while loop, I had to write a couple of extra lines of code. So in this case, the for loop is actually preferable. Because it uses fewer lines of code and it's a little bit cleaner. It might not be quite as intuitive. At this point, I am so familiar with them that it's difficult for me to say. But again, like, for loops and while loops function very much the same. It's just a matter of how you set up the conditions. So I'm going to call it there for this one. And please go ahead and like and subscribe if you found this valuable. I'll catch you in the next.